It used to be that when someone made a statement and then made another statement that implied something completely different, we had a name for that. We called it a contradiction, and it wasn't considered a good thing. You know, not too long ago, contradictions could end political careers in this country. When Tim Murphy said publicly that he was pro-life, but then privately told a woman to kill her baby, he had to resign from Congress. Al Franken met the same fate after he bought into the Me Too hysteria and then fell into its crosshairs himself. But a lot has changed in the few years since Tim Murphy and Al Franken were forced out of Congress. All of a sudden, contradictions are everywhere, particularly in the political world. The only way to ensure world peace is to fund a war, foreign policy experts tell us. We are a sanctuary state, but we don't want any more illegal immigrants, say Gavin Newsom and Eric Adams. Men can turn into women, gender studies professors shriek. Euthanasia is healthcare, the Canadian government insists. All of these statements are contradictions, but you're hearing them all the time now. In revolutionary periods, this is nothing new. Mao even wrote an essay entitled On Contradiction a century ago. Mao understood well that contradiction drives social change. Maybe the most important contradiction that revolutionaries must embrace, Mao argued, is the relationship between construction and destruction. On their face, these two concepts are polar opposites. Tearing something down means ruining it. Building something means creating it. If you want to build something new, you lay a foundation, you get to work. You don't wreck what you have. That's how the bourgeoisie saw it anyway. But Mao didn't see it that way. A half century ago, Mao famously explained, quote, "There is no construction without destruction." In other words, there's a logical relationship between the two concepts. Creating a new society, one totally unlike whatever came before, requires wrecking the old society. Creating new symbols requires wrecking the old symbols. Mao's teachings led to, of course, tens of millions of deaths, the destruction of historic artifacts, mass starvation. The last thing you'd ever want to do or last thing you'd want our political leaders in this country to do is follow his ideology and try to emulate it, but that's exactly what's happening. So this weekend in Albany, the capital of New York, we saw maybe the clearest example in recent history of both construction and destruction happening simultaneously. Under the cover of darkness at 5:30 in the morning, the city removed a statue of Revolutionary War hero and U.S. Senator Philip Schuyler. And at the very moment that workers took Schuyler's statue away, the so-called Progress Pride flag was waving in the background. For the first time in the city's history, by the way. So here's what that looked like. You can see it there. Taking the statue away, and then we've got the multiple pride flags flying proudly as the statue is hoisted away, including the brand new non-binary, BIPOC, trans, whatever flag. They got all the flags there. Now, if that seems like a carefully engineered juxtaposition, it is. It's choreographed to deliver a very clear message. Mao's disciples in the New York State government know that if they want their new flag to have any kind of legitimacy, then Philip Schuyler's statue can't remain. You can't have construction without destruction. If you want revolution, you can't introduce a new idol without erasing the one that came before. So that's exactly what the local government did, as explicitly as they possibly could have done it. If you're not trying to engineer a revolution, if you're just an average person living in New York with reasonable political views, what few of those may remain, then none of this really makes any sense. What was wrong with that statue exactly? As far as can be told here, no one ever bothered to ask a significant number of New Yorkers that question. No one ever ran a poll on this, at least not one that we could find. There was certainly no statewide referendum on whether people actually wanted Philip Schuyler's statue to be removed. A few bureaucrats in New York just decided to do it a few years ago, and this weekend they cut through the red tape and they did it. A local news station did conduct a man-on-the-street style interview with a couple of residents, in the city to get their perspective, but none of them could explain why the statue is being removed. Even the people who supported removing it couldn't really explain why they supported it. No big surprise there, but let's watch.
It feels good. The people have been listened to, and it feels good.
I'm just happy that taken down if the history behind it is not something that should be, celebrated.
Mary Liz Stewart is the executive director and co-founder of the Education Center.
I think it's time. I was glad to see some action finally taken on an issue that actually percolated, about 4 years ago, I think.
She says the group of teenagers spent a whole school year investigating a whole variety of aspects that related to the statue. Not only the history of it, but why was it made, what the cost was to make it, and what other communities were doing with controversial statues that related to enslavement. Stewart says the students wrote to Mayor Sheehan recommending it be removed but not destroyed, rather to preserve it and use it for educational purposes.
One of the things that was very important for the teens about moving the Schuyler statue was the fact that, from their perspective, City Hall should be a place that's welcoming to everybody in the community, and it was hard to say that was the case with Phil, standing there.
Yes, a century-old historic artifact memorializing a Revolutionary War hero was not only taken down, it was taken down at the behest of a group of teenagers. And the primary reason, as we heard in the clip, is that the absence of the statue will make City Hall more, quote unquote, welcoming. But welcoming for who? If the standard is that any unwelcoming statue needs to go, then why exactly can't we destroy the monument of George Floyd that sits, for example, outside City Hall in Newark? But George Floyd didn't own slaves, you might say. Well, that's true. All George Floyd ever did was break into a woman's home with 5 other people, hold a gun to her chest, rob her in front of her kid. And then after getting out of prison, all George Floyd did was take enough opioids and meth to kill a horse before trying to rob a store and fighting with several police officers. Despite all that, you're not allowed to even criticize the George Floyd statue. You'll lose your job if you do. Under the new rules, George Floyd's statue is welcoming. The Revolutionary War general is unwelcoming. You understand that? Well, probably you don't understand it, but then you aren't supposed to understand, because part of the point behind these arbitrary decisions is that they make no logical or moral sense. You're meant to go along with it, whether you understand or not. We might ask why, but the powers that be will treat us like we're children, and there are impatient parents. Because I said so, they respond. Congress once again allowed itself to be pushed into appeasing the administration and raising the debt ceiling for the 79th time, paving the way for continued reckless spending and further devaluation of the dollar. As our national debt continues to skyrocket, how are you protecting your savings? Times like these are a great reminder to diversify a portion of your savings into gold. And you can do that with the help of Birch Gold. They're who I buy my gold from. So do thousands of other concerned savers. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. You don't pay a penny out of pocket. When currencies fail, gold is a safe haven. How much more time does a dollar have left? Think about that. Well, you can protect your savings with gold. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers, and you can find out why if you text Walsh to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold. Again, text Walsh to 989898. It's also contrived. Philip Schuyler is an iconic figure of the Revolutionary War era. He's one of the reasons this country exists today. Multiple towns and forts are named after him in New York. And curiously, no one had a problem with him until very recently. 10 years ago, in an article, the Albany Times-Union described Schuyler this way, quote, Philip Schuyler was a leading American statesman and a key general in the American Revolution who served at the pivotal Battle of Saratoga. He was named a representative to the First Continental Congress of Philadelphia and an advisor to General George Washington, who stayed at Schuyler's mansion in Albany. The Times-Union went on to describe Schuyler as, quote, instrumental in the victory of the American colonists at the Battle of Saratoga in the fall of 1777, a turning point of the Revolutionary War. Residents of Albany, fearful that their city might be occupied by British soldiers, instead celebrated an unexpected victory at Saratoga. It was the first major win for the colonists, and the residents of Albany rang church bells, fired cannons, roasted an ox, and gathered around a large bonfire. Schuyler returned to the city of his birth as a hero. Now, you can read the whole article. It's still on the Times-Union's website from 2013. There's not a single mention of slavery or slaves in the entire piece. But guess how the Times-Union, the same newspaper, describes Schuyler now? Here's a recent article from the paper from this year. Quote, while noted as a politician and Revolutionary War hero, Schuyler enslaved over a dozen people at his Saratoga and Albany homes. The Times-Union of 2023 goes on to cite, and this is not a joke, a report by 5 high schoolers who say that Schuyler is a bad man and his statue has to be removed. That's the report you heard referenced in that news clip as well. So here's how the Times-Union describes the findings of these high school students. Quote, the report titled What to Do with Phil, a 2022 report from the Young Abolitionist Leader Institute, was created by 5 Albany high school students who met between October 2021 and June with 2 adult facilitators. While the report notes Schuyler's accomplishments as a Revolutionary War general and politician, his legacy is still marked by owning human beings, it says. This is also the report that the Albany government relied on to justify removing the statue. facile does not begin to describe this. I mean, in the 18th century, no one had the same attitude towards slavery that we do now, even the people who opposed it, which relatively few people did back then on a global scale. It's not surprising that a bunch of dumb, arrogant kids would lack the proper historical perspective and think themselves qualified to pass moral judgment on historical figures who lived 250 years ago, but that's where adults are supposed to step in. The problem is that there aren't very many adults left in this country. What's really going on here is that Schuyler, like Jefferson, Washington, Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, all the other historical figures who've had their monuments destroyed, is that these are heroes of a different nation, one that the city of Albany considers to be a foreign enemy, basically. And they know they have to erase him if they want their revolution to succeed. The Biden administration understands this as well, obviously. Look at this grotesque display currently hanging at the White House. They put this up over the weekend, and that is a pride flag hanging on the White House, and it's in between two American flags. There are similar displays all over the country, of course, at 30 Rock and so on, but putting this flag at the White House, just like the flag at Albany City Hall, has particular implications. And most conservatives, as that was put up over the weekend, reacted to it, and were saying that it's horrific and it's evil for the White House to not only fly the pride flag, but to give it a place of primacy in between two American flags. And of course, it is both of those things. It's horrific and evil, for sure. But what they don't understand is that the White House is also properly representing its own nation, which is not our nation. Okay, we are two nations in one. There is the old United States that conservatives still cling to and cherish, and there's a new country with its own flag, its own traditions, its own heroes and foundational myths, etc. That's the nation that the Biden regime, the media, academia, Hollywood all speak to and represent. Why do you think that the city of New York took down Teddy Roosevelt's statue recently? I mean, liberals used to love him. He was one of the greatest presidents this country ever had. He broke up big monopolies. He was well-read. He saved the middle class. He established national parks. He was a pioneer, an explorer. They took down Teddy Roosevelt's statue in New York for a specific reason, which was to replace it. Instead of Teddy Roosevelt, New York recently put up the horned statue of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And that's now happening at scale. The nation we had before is being replaced. It's not just that demographics are changing, though they are. The activists who are leading this revolution, like all totalitarians, understand that to take full control, they need to erase our shared history. And they're executing this plan right in front of us, in plain sight, as obvious as they possibly can. While conservatives are debating the proper positioning of the American flag in relation to the pride flag at the White House, the government is going out in the middle of the night and destroying the symbols they don't like. They're not asking your opinion about it. They're just doing it. And with that in mind, it's not hard to wonder, what else will they take away before you even realize it? A lot more than statues. Soon the government may be able to kidnap your children if you don't subscribe to the cult of gender ideology. That's happening in Canada. It's been happening for years now. And that's an actual bill in California right now, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But they will label you a child abuser and put you in prison for wrongthink so the state can raise your child. That's the ultimate goal of this push for inclusion, quote unquote, which of course is fundamentally about excluding anyone with traditional views and in particular religious views. The totalitarians running the government, like all totalitarians throughout history, are obsessed with using their power to make future generations subservient to their rule. That's the reason they're sponsoring pride parades that expose children to deviant sexual fetishes and everything else. That's the reason they're destroying and replacing everything they can. It took the single deadliest famine in world history to stop Mao. What will it take to stop the revolution that's taking place right now in this country? And the longer this goes on, the longer sane people stay quiet and watch as it all happens, the more likely it is that, unfortunately, we're going to find out. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.